This episode is brought to you by Leela Quantum Tech.
I am beyond excited, the word doesn't describe it, to have Dr. Shanna Swan on the podcast today because I think there's some information that you deserve to know, that we all deserve to know. And quite frankly, I am a little angry that I didn't know some of this stuff earlier, especially as I talk about fertility issues and the thought of my children potentially having trouble conceiving due to environmental toxins. So we're going to talk a lot about the low-hanging fruit. What are some things that you can look out for? What are some changes that you should be aware of? And just so you know, Shanna is a scientist. She is an award-winning scientist, actually, based at Mount Sinai. And Dr. Swan has published more than 200 scientific papers. She really is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the topics of environmental toxins. So we're going to talk a lot about plastic, a lot about phthalates, even a bit about pesticides, which you listened to my episode with the glyphosate girl or Kelly Ryerson. You already know about glyphosate, but we're going to talk about a few other ones and how it is impacting the female reproductive system and the male reproductive system, and what we can offer you in making some simple changes in order to combat this ever crazy life that we live in. And I hope that you take away from this episode all the great things that I did. Thanks for listening. Well, what a pleasure it is to have you here. And I have to say it at least once, Dr. Shanna Swan. I think that is such an important thing to feature because it just gives people an understanding of how much value and how much time you spent towards your career and the research that you've done. But I would like to give you the opportunity to actually let people know your background a little bit, what you specialize in, and how much time you've dedicated to talking about plastics and their effects on infertility and reproduction, because I know that is really where you specialize.
Thank you, Misha. If I was going to talk about my whole career, it would go way, way back to an entirely different life. I started as a child actress in New York, and that's people are very surprised when they hear that.
Oh,
but I then went into mathematics, and from there I went into statistics, and from there I went into my first applied statistics job, which was looking at how oral contraceptives affect the health of women. So that's already pretty close to what I'm doing, because a lot of it was reproductive. It was about a hormonal agent, which is oral contraceptives is an endocrine disruptor. We take it because it's an endocrine disruptor, right? We want to disrupt our cycles in a certain way. And what were the health effects? So that actually is pretty similar to a lot of what I'm doing, now. And but the big leap was when I joined the health department in California. I started looking at not a pill like oral contraceptives, but the environment. And I joined and started a program called reproductive epidemiology within the health department, within the environmental health investigations branch. And I really liked that. I liked the challenge. I liked meeting with people, understanding what their concerns were, trying to address them. So I like the interaction. I still like that. I don't think about research in a vacuum on a computer. I like to think about it an interaction between people and their health and their problems. So that's kind of my approach. And back when I was doing oral contraceptives, that was already reproductive health, right? So I've been doing that for a very, very long time. I joined the health department in 1982. And then in the late 90s, mid late 90s, I joined a committee in Washington, which had the task of answering the question, are these new chemicals that people are talking about, which have been named the kind of difficult name endocrine disrupting chemicals. We can talk about that some more, but are these chemicals affecting people? Is this really something that should be studied? And at that point, it wasn't clear.
Balance your energy, boost performance, and shield yourself from EMF nasties. Quantum Upgrade is leading the way in natural health innovation, combining science and quantum energy healing into an accessible and simple to use subscription service that I think you're going to love. What I love about it is that it's entirely customizable. I have my phone, my car, myself, and my home all set up uniquely. I can change the service to fit my needs at any time. And I do this regularly because my personal needs change all the time. I switch from Olympic training mode for my intense training sessions to women's booster for my hormone optimization, and even to self-love and partnership for date nights with my man. You can get more than your standard 7-day free trial when you use my code MIESHA15, that's MIESHA 15.
Right? It was just like a new thing, and oh, well, should we worry about this? And the answer was mixed for the committee because there was a minority that I was part of, and then there was a central group, which is kind of neutral, and then there was the other side, which found that not so much of a problem right now, maybe in the future. But my minority group felt like it was a serious problem.
And that was part of you. You were part of the minority
and I
group.
was part of that group,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So I think at that point, I would say and that was, I think, 98, I became committed to studying these chemicals and seeing what they did to people's health. Okay. And then I went back to the health department and I said, look, these things are really important. I think the health department has to be studying these. And I couldn't get the interest. I couldn't get them to say yes. So I left.
Well,
and that's been that's what I've done over my career. I've changed when something new interests me.
Why do you think, I mean, I could give you my hypothesis is that, hey, it's not really an issue yet. We don't want to allocate the time and resources for something that it isn't apparent. Not a lot of people seem to care about. Why make a big deal out of it? And even if some of the things that you're bringing to the table seem to surely point towards supporting the case that you're making, we just don't really want to take this case on right now. Is that
right? And we have a lot of other stuff to do.
Right.
Yeah. And part of it to in support of the Department of Health, I would say we were given the task of responding to concerns from the public. And at this point, there were not concerns from the public about these chemicals, right? So
are there now?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Not what there should be, but there are definite concerns. There are many, many nonprofits that tell people what the problem is. The bigger problem, how chemicals in our daily life, everywhere, all the time, chemicals affect our body's health everywhere, all the time. The number of people that know that care about it, that want to take action is very, very small. Fortunately, you've joined that crew now by having me on, but it's not a majority, of the public for sure. People are, and I really appreciate this. Life right now is extremely stressful, right? And there's so much going on with things may or may not be related to these chemicals, like in climate change. Okay, well, that actually is related to these chemicals. How? Because a lot of these chemicals are made from the byproducts of fossil fuels. So if we didn't have this fossil fuel industry, we wouldn't have these byproducts, and we'd have to make our plastics a whole different way, which probably would be a lot safer. Okay, so there's that. There's the stress of world events. We don't have to go into that. There's this economic stressors and so on and on and on and on. And people don't need another thing to worry about. And that's the impression I get from people, like, fine, let other people worry about that. But I'm raising my kids and I'm bringing the food on the table and I'm dealing with my job and so on and so forth. And I can't spare the energy and the time to worry about what's in the stuff I put on my face or on my hair or in my laundry or in my, right?
Oh, I know. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes I've used this description before, but I feel like I am in a batting cage, but the balls are coming from every which direction, and I'm just swinging, trying to keep myself and my family safe from the environmental toxins and so much that is wrong with our food system and our sick care system. But I have you here today to specifically take 1 hour and provide people with free information, which I'm so grateful for your voice in this field, because as I mentioned before we got on the podcast, I have changed so much about my household thanks to you, because I don't know if it's worth it, but I oftentimes, as soon as I get home from the grocery store, I take things out of their plastic containers and I immediately put them into glass so that they don't sit overnight in my fridge. And it's a lot of extra dishes and it's a lot of extra work. But that's actually one of the questions that I had for you. It's a little maybe out of order in the way that I had thought this would go in my head, but I really want you to get into endocrine disruptors and what is the endocrine system and what does it look like when something disrupts that. But before, would you please tell me, is it worth it? Am I making a good choice by all these extra dishes? Because it is more work on myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you could actually convince yourself of that, I think, and other people could, if you could see what was in your body. Would that be interesting to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So it's not hard. Many of these chemicals are water soluble. That means they go in your urine. Yes?
Okay. Yes.
That's
So
okay.
I can send my urine in for a test?
Absolutely.
Okay. Where? And how?
Well, one company is a company called Million Marker, based in California. They have a website. You can go on that. I don't remember exactly what the price is. $200, something like that. It's not free for sure, although I think it should be. I think this should be paid for by manufacturers. But and they also have people trained to talk to you about if you have something that's high, if you have a level of a chemical called, say, bisphenol A, BPA, everyone's heard about BPA, right? BPA free, this and that. Okay, so BPA is one of those water soluble chemicals. You can measure it in the urine. So suppose you have a high level of BPA, or maybe you have a high level in the evening, but not in the morning. That happens too. And that would be because things you did during the day would show up in your urine at night, right? Exposures you had during the day. These chemicals last in your body for about 4 hours. So when you pee into a cup and send that in, what you're capturing is the last 4 hours of exposure.
Okay, now I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, although I love what you're saying, and I think I'm absolutely going to do this. But if I pee into a plastic cup, is the plastic cup itself leaching into the urine sample?
You don't want to pee into a plastic cup, and they'll give you a container that will not be leachable.
Okay, that is great to know and distinguish.
Yeah, they'll send you a kit, and it'll have a container, and that container will be not contributing to your apparent exposure, right?
Okay.
Okay. And then in the interview with you, they would say, what personal care products do you use? What do you put on your face? What do you wash your hair with? What do you wash your clothes with?
Right. So me personally, and I know you're not asking me exactly personally, but I started making my own laundry detergent. It sits in a glass container. I make my own toothpaste. It's just like coconut oil and baking soda. It sits in a glass container. If I buy something like orange juice, I switch it right into a glass container when I come home. I mean, I don't store my food in plastic. All my containers at home are made out of glass, minus the lid, but I make sure that nothing touches the actual lid itself. So some people are probably like, whoa, I had no idea that Misha Tate was so over the top with this. But I think I only have to be over the top because I have to take it upon myself to fight a fight. And this is war, in my opinion. This is war. This is war in my body. This is war in my home. I have to take charge and hopefully start to lead a little bit of a charge with the help of other people that have been leading this charge, such as yourself before me. But this I believe will absolutely affect my children's ability to reproduce healthy offspring. You cannot look me in my face and tell me that there is a more important job as a mother to ensure that my children will be able to have healthy children. I will not prioritize anything more than that. And to know that phthalates and these endocrine disruptors are a silent war that's going on. And just because other people don't care about it, the people who should care about it, that can pass laws that should prove that, make sure that these things don't harm us, that they don't allocate resources, then it's my job. It's my responsibility to make sure that these things don't enter my home as much as I possibly can. I don't do fragrances. I make my own candles. I give my friends candles that are with essential oils. I mean, I really have diligently tried my best to dive into this and avoid as much as possible. But the truth is there's no avoiding it completely. So if I cut you off somewhere that you needed to finish off, then please have the floor. And if you feel like moving into the discussion of endocrine and disruptors and how that system works in the body, that would be lovely as well.
Okay. So first of all, I want to congratulate you. I think what you're doing sounds absolutely great. And I suspect that when you do this test with Million Marker, you will see quite low levels compared to other people in their database. That would be my guess. And I'd be very interested. We can have this conversation later. You can send it in and then we can have another conversation, go over your results if you want.
I would love to.
Actually.
I'm going to do that. And I would gladly love to have you back on. And I'll probably also try to send my children's samples in as well, because I want to know how well I'm doing for them. Do a lot of people do that with their children? Is this something?
I don't think so. It's not cheap, right? $200 a shot. And sometimes, I'm working with a movie team, which I don't want to go into in detail, but one of the things we're doing is getting couples urine before and after they reduce their exposure. Mm-hmm. And so you've already reduced yours. It's possible we could have a conversation maybe offline or something where go over ways you could reduce it further, or the Million Marker people could advise you on ways you could reduce it further. And then you could see if your levels went down further. But anyway, let's go back to what endocrine disruptors are. So I think oral contraceptives is a good example because that's something that everybody knows affects your body's hormones, right? That's why you take an oral contraceptive or, an estrogen at the time of menopause or a testosterone supplement. You're doing it to change your body's hormone levels. Yes?
You know what, though? This is sad to say, but I feel like a lot of people don't actually know that. I think a lot of people, I know that probably sounds like a mind-blowing thing, but I bet you there are 18-year-old girls, 16-year-old girls that come in and say, this is going to keep me from getting pregnant. And the doctor says, yep. And they take the pill and they have no idea the impact that they're having on their hormones. Not a clue, because it's not a conversation that was ever had with me. I took birth control for a few years. Thankfully, not very long, but it's also presented as just like, it's so nice to not have a cycle, and female athletes use this. And I really don't think that they understand what's actually happening on a very basic level through the body. They just look at, hey, this is what I get out of this. They don't really know what they're paying for it on the other side.
Right. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on oral contraceptives because that's another discussion. But I told you that I spent a couple of years studying what did oral contraceptives do to women's health. And the bottom line is that when the doses were reduced, which they were after the beginning, they were higher and then they were brought down. When the doses were reduced, the health effects were pretty slim. They're really quite safe for people to use and be confident in. So I'm not trashing them at all. I'm just using that as an example of something that everyone's familiar with that is endocrine disrupting chemical. It changes your body's hormones. And that's what an EDC, endocrine disrupting chemical, does. It changes your body's natural hormone system. And it affects specific hormones. And the ones I'm most specifically interested in is the steroids, which is the estrogens, the androgens, progesterones, which are tied to reproduction, because I study reproduction, right? But, other endocrine disruptors can affect the thyroid hormones, which I know you're interested in. Others can affect the immune function, the immune system, and how you respond to immune challenges. And that's been a really big problem now, with the increase of infections, COVID, and so on. So the body just runs on hormones. That's how it works. It needs the hormones. The hormones carry the signal, from the gland to the tissue where it's supposed to go. It's been delivered. And if that process is interfered with, you interfere with function. That's they're critical. And so learning about endocrinology is a whole, that's a profession, endocrinologist. And but I will tell you that the Endocrine Society in the United States has come out strongly in support of limiting exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals, because they know, they see it on the ground, what it's doing to people's health.
So if I'm understanding you right, in basic terms, the endocrine system is sort of the system that is responsible for communicating through the body what hormones are present at what time. Would that be correct?
And when you should make more and where they should go.
Okay.
Yes.
So when we have something like a phthalate that is disrupting the hormone, or these plastics, and when you say BPA, is that like an equivalent of a phthalate? Are they the same thing but in like a different category?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a good question. And it's a good example, because the phthalates are what characterizes them most importantly, I think, is the fact that they can lower testosterone. Okay? Testosterone lowering hormones, which, by the way, no man in the world is going to want. Right. So, and the consequences of lowering your body's testosterone are enormous. The BPA, on the other hand, is going to raise your body's estrogen. So they're kind of, I call them, evil twins, because the phthalates make plastic soft and flexible, and they do other things too, which we can talk about. But the BPA makes plastic hard. You think about a hard water bottle, right? So they're kind of opposite in function, and they also impact very different hormonal systems. But they both affect reproduction. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So if phthalates are in the body and they're lowering testosterone, how does that happen? We drink a bottle of plastic water and all these phthalates come in, right? A bottle of flexible plastic water, water bottle, as I learned, and it comes in. By the way, women don't want testosterone lowered either, I would like to say. No, we don't get very much of it, so I certainly...
We need what we get.
We need what we get. But let's stick with the testosterone. It comes into the body. How does that work? How does it disrupt anything?
Well, the way that the chemicals act, there's several ways, but the most graphic, if you will, the most easy to understand, is that the body has these receptors attached to cells. Like, think of them as little cups almost, this, and they are going to latch on to the estrogen or the androgen, and then that will lead to the functioning of that chemical. It'll do its job. But if the receptor is occupied, okay, it's busy, it's taken up, somebody's sitting there, the seat is taken, if you will.
Okay.
Then the natural hormone can't settle in there and can't be transmitted to do the job that has to be done, and it'll be blocked. So by receptor occupancy, we call it, the action of the hormone is blocked. So that's one way it can act. It can also act by, and that can also affect what's called the nuclear receptor. It also can affect how much hormone is produced. It can affect how it travels, and so on. The hormones are doing all kinds of things all the time, all over the body. And many, many functions of these hormones are interfered with by these artificial hormones. Impositors, I call them. And I sometimes think about it as these things, like in a war, they're sneaking in under the radar, they're missed, and then they go about their job and they sneak in and they occupy these receptors and they interfere with transmission, of information and so on and so forth, so that the hormones can't do their job. You think of it as a war. These are like,
Yeah, like little secret
Yeah,
agents
right?
that go in there and then spread a bunch of misinformation like, hey,
Yeah. Hey,
testosterone's
exactly.
already here. We don't need real testosterone. We don't need the body to produce testosterone anymore because this seat's already taken. So why do we have so
Yeah.
much testosterone? But the testosterone that's actually needing to be put in these seats and put in the driver's seat is not ever actually getting a chance to be utilized, right? So it's going to work in a double negative there,
Yeah.
where the body thinks that it
Yeah.
has it because the receptor's full. So it's going to stop
Exactly.
producing it because it's saying, well, we've already got it, but this one is not
Yeah.
actually doing what the job of testosterone would do.
Great.
Okay, so I'm picking up what you're putting down.
So what does that do? Let's just think about what that can do, right?
Yes.
So can I talk a little bit about the developing fetus? Is that okay?
I would love to know about that. As I think about, I'm contemplating having another child, and I want to make sure that the third time's a charm, that I get it right. Sorry, for my first two kids, I tried my best, but I'm getting smarter in my old age.
So, early in pregnancy, if you look at the genitals, which is certainly a seat of a lot of this action for these sex steroids, the genitals are very similar in a genetic male and a genetic female. Okay, and there's something called the genital ridge. It's just, you can't distinguish very early in pregnancy, I would say first week or before, which is a male and which is a female. And then at some point, testosterone starts to be produced by the genetic male. Okay, and that testosterone gives a signal to the genetic male to start differentiating from this neutral genital tract. So it starts out, you think of it as a line, and then the testosterone comes along and the genitals say, oh, wait, I need to develop the scrotum. I need to develop the penis. And that starts, right?
Okay.
Very early in pregnancy. If the testosterone isn't there, or if it comes late, or if there's not enough of it, then that motion toward the male typical genitals is not complete. And you get genitals which are small and maybe malformed and all kinds of other problems we can talk about. So that testosterone coming in there at that time, critical time, right amount, is absolutely essential to distinguish the genitals of genetic males and genetic females. But let me stop there and see if you have a question about that, because that's absolutely key to the whole story.
No, I've definitely heard you talk about this at length, so I do feel like I have a good grasp on that. And I think you also mentioned in a previous podcast that the actual space between the scrotum and the anus, the taint, is actually shrunken as well. So it kind of seems like everything is just becoming the lines are becoming blurred.
Exactly.
If male was one shade and female was another, that it would become this kind of a little bit more murky, not quite as clear as it was maybe if we didn't have these endocrine disrupting toxins. Is that a great word? Toxins?
Yeah, that's great. You should take my class anytime. So murky is a great way to say it. And it's actually measurable, but this was first discovered in rodents, rats and mice, it was shown in. It's that if you gave the pregnant dam a certain amount of phthalate, and certain phthalates, some are worse than others, and we can talk about which ones those are, and then this problem will happen. And you can see that when the males and females are born. So when the males and females are born, you can very carefully, because it's very small. Think about a mouse, think about a mouse genitals. You're going to be doing something very small, but you can measure how long is the distance from the anus to the genitals. And to do that, you have to decide, what do you mean by genitals? And, we can talk about that. But for now, let's just say from the anus to where the scrotum starts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's called the anus-scrotal distance. And that distance is about twice as long in a genetic male as a genetic female in most mammals. And that's because there's stuff that has to go in there. The genitals have to go in that space. So that's kind of why it's bigger. So if you make everything smaller, that distance is smaller, and you can measure that. You can do, get a little ruler and you can measure that and you can show that. So what the animal study showed was that when the mother was given phthalates in early pregnancy, actually in just a 3-day window in early pregnancy, then the male was not completely masculinized. His genitals were more on the female direction, and this distance called the anogenital distance, or the taint, or the gooch, or the grundle, which, by the way, is a very important marker for kids on the street. Have those terms, because it's sensitive. It's a sensitive area. They talk about it, and that area is small. Okay, and when it's small, it's not, the animal doesn't become female. It's just an incompletely masculinized male. Okay.
Okay. Yes, it's alarming, and I don't want to take you off direction, but makes me think, okay, well, if this is an external, measurable way to see how phthalates are affecting male anatomy, what is going on the inside? Like, what's going on in the brain? What's going on in those areas? Because as I get more on this journey of understanding how things work both in and out of the outside of the body, is stress an external thing or is it an internal thing? It all seems to work in correlation with each other, relative to each other. And so a lot of times I find, for example, when I had a more stressful existence, if you will, I was in a toxic relationship, I had eczema, and it was very present on the insides of my wrists and the tops of my hands, and I was chronically in a state of stress. And I haven't had not one single episode of eczema in probably about 9 years. I just don't have it anymore. But my internal, I believe my hormones and the structure of everything, the way that I interpret my environment is much different now. So bringing back, I guess, to my question is, if we have a measurable physical, is there also a part of it that goes up and says, well, what's happening on the inside? What's happening to the brain with these things, the phthalates?
I love that question. And once again, you hit the nail on the head. You get another A for that. Yeah, because I used to I had a friend, unfortunately, he's not living anymore, but he used to say, his name was Bernie Weiss. He used to say, Shauna, he said, you should look at the brain. The brain is the biggest sex organ in the body. So, it's internal. So are the genitals. There are lots of parts of the genitals that are internal. But what's different is the function, of course. And so we decided to start looking at the brain. And we found that when the mother was exposed to phthalates in early pregnancy, same hormones, same phthalates, same timing, actually, although the timing is not so well defined for the brain as it is for the genitals, but it probably starts quite early, like the genitals. Then if we ask the mother, when the kids are 4 years old is when we ask them, tell us about how your child plays. Okay, so there's an instrument called the Preschool Activities Inventory, quite old now and should be redone. But this inventory asks questions like, how often does your kid play with dolls, or your child play with dolls? I don't say kid, I'm sure. Child play with dolls, and how often with tea sets, and how often do they play sports, and so on and so on and so on. And there's 24 questions like this. And these are grouped into male typical and female typical answers. And then there's a score given, and there's a masculinity score and a femininity score. And when the mother has more exposure to these phthalates in early pregnancy, then the boys' answers are less male typical and their masculinity score is lower, just like their genitals.
Oh my goodness. It's such eye-opening information to have access to. So, I've heard you talk a lot about males and clearly the reproductive impact that phthalates are having on lowered sperm count, which I would love to move into as well. But what about our females? Are we noticing something that's clearly defined in the female reproductives? I mean, do our eggs have more phthalates? Are we becoming more masculine at all with our answers? Or are we even becoming more feminized? Well, yeah, I guess that's a bit of a loaded question, but what do you think?
Well, for the female side, I think you want to look at the estrogen exposure. And because while, as you said, females do have testosterone, which is what's going on here, lowering testosterone through the phthalates, they are not as dependent on it for their development. But estrogen is really key. Right. And what happens when, and that's going to be not phthalates, but bisphenol A and other estrogenic compounds. And there's some overlap where some chemicals are both, but let's just kind of keep it clean right here and just say there are many impacts on female reproduction having to do with the quality of the eggs, the number of the eggs. A female is born with all the eggs she's ever going to have. Okay, so what's happening to her egg supply in utero is laying down the foundation for her reproductive health her whole life. Okay, as far as the brain goes, the female is exposed female is going to be probably entering menopause, menarche a little bit early and then menopause early.
Wait, so you mean what did you mean by menarche? I haven't heard that word before.
I'm sorry, menarche is breast development, puberty.
Okay.
They'll enter puberty earlier. So their breasts, and maybe you've heard about this, that the age at breast development has dropped. This is not an equal across all groups. It actually appears to be a greater problem for African Americans, for example. There's a race ethnic specific component to this, but overall, there is a drop in the age at first menstrual cycle, the age at breast development, and then later in life, everything kind of shifts and women don't have good enough eggs left toward later in life, and they tend to have menopause earlier. So it's affecting women in a different way, and different hormones are at play and different chemicals are most important. But I'd say both estrogens and phthalates are important for males and females, just in different, quantities. They matter differently in males and females.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like it's becoming more common for girls to be 8 years old and starting their cycles. I mean, that just seems really young to me. I don't know if there is an average of what it used to be, like what women used to start their cycles at, young girls, and what it is today. Is there a number there that is worth noting?
Again, it depends on the race ethnic group, but there have been many studies that I can't quote you the numbers right now, but there has definitely been a drop in age at first cycle and first breast development. We're looking at that, by the way, in our current study. We have a population, I say we, my colleagues at University of Washington, Minnesota, and so on, are following the children born to women whose urine we collected when they were pregnant. Because we have the urine, and that allows us to look inside the pregnant woman's body, and then we can say, okay, how do the kids develop? And we're doing that. I think they're now about 12 and a half years old. So we're in a perfect place to answer that question.
Okay, that's great to know. Let's move into sperm count then. What is going on there? Because I've heard some pretty alarming statistics when it comes to the drop and decline of sperm count.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a scary and tough area. So, and controversial, I would say, as well. So back in 92, that's a long time ago, right? Uh, there was a paper that came out of Denmark and said, hold on, sperm count has declined 50% in 50 years. Okay, now remember I was on that committee, the National Academy of Science Committee. So they said to me, okay, should we worry about this? Is this paper worth worrying about? And I looked at it and I thought, probably not. Famous last words, right? My approach has always been skeptical. Let's assume something is wrong until it's proven right, you know? And so I looked at this paper and I said, well, look, you know, this is a long time. It's a lot of countries. It's a lot of populations of men. The populations could have changed. How you measured sperm can change. Lots can change in 50 years, right? And so without knowing more about it, I'm going to say probably we don't have to worry about it. But I had to look. So what I did was I got all the underlying studies and I went through each of them with two colleagues, and we took out, you know, how old were the men, and were they obese, and where did they come from, and were they infertility patients, or were they vasectomy patients? What kind of population was it? And how was the sperm counted, and so on, all these things, right? That's the kind of things that epidemiologists do, you know? And so we did all that, and then we put that in a big model, all that data, and we ran it. And the most surprising thing was it didn't change the bottom line at all, not to the first decimal place. The rate of change stayed at 0.93% per year, about 1% per year, you know, no matter what we did. So that was, whoa, I thought, wow, then that looks like maybe that's real. And I went back to the committee and I said, yes, I think we should consider this. And then I thought, well, okay, if it's real, what's going on here? It's not the men, how we selected them. It's not the way we counted sperm, because we controlled for that. So then it's not genetics, because it's too fast for that. It's, you know, 1 to 2 generations. So then it has to be environment. And if it's environment, we should be able to see that by measuring sperm count really carefully in different environments. That make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I'm following you.
So I designed a study to measure sperm concentration count. By the way, concentration is the number of sperms in a unit square that's laid out under the microscope. So concentration count is the total. We wanted to measure that in the same way in 4 places in the United States that had different environments.
Okay.
And we did that. We got money from NIH, did that study, got the pregnant. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you this, but we decided the way to get the men in an unbiased way from a group of men who would all have kind of connections with medical care equally. We took partners of pregnant women, because almost every pregnant woman goes for medical care and their partners are unselected in any way, right? They're all pregnant women, and the men have gotten them pregnant, presumably. But other than that, they're not selected. So we thought that was a good way to compare environments, because we'd do that the same in all places. And we got the couples, they gave us urine, which was very good for later studies. And we looked at the sperm count. And what we found, and this is so dramatic, Misha, if you look at Minnesota, which is industrial, you know, it's a city, right? Urban. And then you look at Columbia, Missouri, which is agricultural, the men in Missouri had half as many moving sperm as the men in Minneapolis. 50% reduction in sperm concentration in an agricultural setting. It's pretty dramatic, isn't it?
It's very dramatic. And I would have thought, had I not known any different, that it would be almost the other way around, because you would think, in an urban setting, you'd have more, you have fumes and exhaust and a busy life and stress and, all these other things, the water might not be as good as clean. But please tell me why the ones out.
So we were able to measure, and this was in a small sample, by the way. We never got the money to do it in a big sample, but we were able to measure the levels of pesticides in the urine of the men who were part of the study. And we found that the men who had low levels, well, let's say the men who had very good sperm in terms of count, and it's not just count, it's also how they move and their shape and their morphology, motility. We looked at all that, and we divided our population, small population, into very good performers, very poor performers, and then we looked at the pesticide in their body. And for the pesticides that we were looking at, which is called the triazines, a class of atrazine is one of them. These are chemicals that were pesticides that were used there.
Glyphosate too?
No, unfortunately, we didn't look at glyphosate. I wish we had, but that was a long time ago. And I don't even know if Roundup, I don't think Roundup was in the market at that time. We focused on atrazine, which was a chemical which colleagues had shown had the ability to feminize frogs. Right? and these chemicals were significantly higher in the men with the low sperm count and poor motility and poor morphology. So we showed and published that these pesticides were significantly linked to men's semen quality. So there we had proof that environment mattered. And environment matters in many, many, many ways. This is only one of them, but it was just proof of principle. Yes, if you collect sperm using the same methods of counting and getting them in the getting the samples and same kinds of men and all that, but they're, have different exposures, then their sperm count will differ. So that was one of the first studies showing that environment really did affect sperm count. And many, many, many studies have been showing that since. So let's fast forward to 2014. Some colleagues and I were at a meeting. We were talking about this, and we looked back to the study that had come out in 1992, and we said, that's a long time ago. Maybe we should see what's happened to sperm count since then, right?
Yeah.
And so we designed this very large, what's called a meta-analysis, which is a literature review of a very high quality. And we spent 2 years combing through the literature, using protocols that were published ahead of time so they would be objective, getting these data abstracted and analyzed. And we published that in 2017, and it was one of the most cited papers in the world in that whole year. It was a very, very big hit, because what we showed, again, was that sperm count was declining at the rate of 1% per year. And it hadn't stopped. We had looked at it first, 1992, Denmark had looked at it. We looked at it in 2017, and it was the same decline. And there's one more part to that story. Want me to go to
tell me. I'm just like shaking my head over here, just like it,
Yeah, right.
Okay, so tell me the rest of the bad news.
So a few years after we published it, we thought, well, okay, let's do it again. Let's see now we have some more time. And we had these predictions from, 2017, a model that could make predictions. How did those predictions bear out, and what can we say now? And so in 2020, 2023, we published an update to that 2017 paper, and we found two important things. One is that unlike the 2017 paper, which didn't have enough studies in third world countries to say much about them, we now saw the declines in third world countries. Okay, so we were now looking for the first time at a really worldwide decline. And the other thing we found is that the rate of decline was actually picking up. Things were getting bad faster than they had been when we published in 2017.
Some
Actually,
exponential momentum.
quite a lot faster. Yeah, quite a lot faster.
Oh, it's so alarming. And it's sad because I feel like, and I can't be the only one to notice, that there are so many more fertility issues these days than I ever recall before. And I have to sit back and say, was I just not paying attention before? Or is this actually becoming more of a consistent issue? You know, my hairstylist, my this, my that, you know, they're trying, they're going through IVF, $30,000 later, it didn't work, you know. And I'm disheartened for these people because I think that it's a biological right for us to be able to procreate, and to be robbed of that potential opportunity with a choice that you didn't know that you were making, or a choice that's being made for us and really feels like hidden from us. The people that really should be doing their jobs to make sure that our food system is clean. We should be able to, I believe it should be an American right. I think it should be a human right to go to the grocery store and be able to buy bread, milk, eggs, you know, fruit that doesn't harm your reproductive future. It's infuriating to me that this is actually what we're talking about here, is that people don't know that this is happening. And now you're talking about environment, you've talked about plastics, and you've touched on pesticides, and you think that we're being hit from multiple angles, and I'm sure that's probably not even all of it. But there are two very heavy hitting factors when it comes to our ability and the future for our species. And it's alarming that it's not being talked about more. I did have one other question for you too, because as these sperm counts lower, we talk about the quantity of sperm count, but what about the quality? Because that matters too, right? So, I mean, even if you had all of the sperm, you know, you had really like a lot of great, but they don't go anywhere, they don't do anything, or they're sick, they don't swim well. Is that also something that you guys are able to control for, or see, or notice? I mean, is there sperm that when you look at it on a slide that's healthy and it's moving and it's great, and then there's maybe sperm that just kind of looks sickly or sluggish, and they're just maybe not able to do their job as well?
Well, those are really important factors. Motility, that's motion, and being able to swim in a straight line, and not just in a circle, for example, is really important. If you swim in a circle, you're not going to get to the goal, right? Having two heads or two tails, or being too skinny or too round. There's many ways that the shape matters. And then there's also the chromosomal makeup of, you know, what they're carrying there in that sperm head. How damaged is that? Which is another question. Now, as far as looking at the trends in those parameters, if you will, we didn't do that, and that's difficult, and I'll tell you why. The way that sperm are counted now have not really changed for over 100 years.
Okay. What does that mean? Yeah.
It means that the same methods that were used, I think, in 1912, the hemocytometer, which is what WHO claims is the state of the art, and that's what people follow who are doing the WHO, you know, following guidelines. That method was present in 1912. That means that method of counting is the same. So some differences, you know, people may have, you know, ways to tweak it, but basically the method of counting has not changed. On the other hand, the method of measuring motility, motion, and morphology, shape, and chromosomally, chromosomal health, those have changed, right? So because of that, we did not attempt to do a meta-analysis on those parameters. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And as a scientist, I can appreciate that you would definitely want to distinguish, because I know that you're not sharing your opinions with us. You're sharing factual information.
Right. Exactly.
But I have to just ask then, I know that this isn't backed by just any particular research, but if you wouldn't mind to share, do you have any thoughts on if it appeared one way or the other? Does it appear that when there's a full sperm count or a reduced sperm count, do you notice just any anecdotal evidence that seems like the sperm is more healthy or less healthy?
Well, those things, which we call parameters, by the way, count, morphology, motility, are correlated. When one goes up, the others tend to go up. So they are traveling together. You have a good sperm count, it makes it much more likely that you have a good motility and morphology. It's not necessary. You could have one messed up and not the others, okay? But so I would say in all likelihood, and this is my guess, and I'm not putting my scientific stamp on it at all because I have not done the study, but I would say my guess is because of this correlation that it is likely that morphology and motility have also declined.
Okay. So I guess my question then would move on to, what are some of your best tips for people to be able to make change and be aware of the environmental toxins? What are some easy, low-hanging fruits that you could say, hey, if you could consistently make this change, you will limit a lot of your exposure to these potential environmental toxins?
Yeah. So I mentioned that in the movie that I'm associated with, we do talk to couples about changing their behaviors, and we give them some products that help them make change. And I believe those products are really important. They include food containers that are not made of plastic. They include wraps, for example, made of beeswax.
I use those.
Yeah.
They're great.
Wraps. Yeah. And they include personal care products that are have fewer chemicals in it that we don't want in our bodies. All of those things are really important. I think how you handle the food is very important. I think probably everyone listening to this knows that you don't want to microwave in plastic. I hope they do. But that is probably the worst thing you can possibly do. So why? Okay, so here's the plastic. It's made with, say, phthalates. It's made with bisphenols and other chemicals. By the way, in preparing for this, I looked up how many chemicals in plastic. And the latest number I've seen is 16,000. I will not stand by that number because I just got it off the web. But anyone can go look at that. Just put in how many chemicals in plastic, and I think you'll be amazed.
16,000 chemicals. Yeah, potentially in a like a plastic bottle, or what you buy your salad in. So many things come in plastic these days. It's really unavoidable. Is heat and cold transferring more of this microplastics too?
Yes.
You'll get there. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So these chemicals that are put into plastic are put there to give it its properties. So, for example, I told you bisphenol A made plastic hard. So it's put in there to harden. Okay. Phthalates are put into plastic tubing, for example, so it'll be soft and flexible. Okay. So these are functions that plastic needs for a certain application. Okay. So they're in there, but they are not chemically bound to the matrix. They can leave. And that's really important because what makes them leave is often heat. So if you have a water bottle in your car and the car gets, I was just in Palm Springs, it was 112. I'm sure there was a lot of bisphenols in those water bottles in those cars. It was, they just leave the matrix and they jump into the fluid that's in there. In our bodies, if we go to the hospital, we get an IV, we get, chemotherapy, we get dialysis. Any of that process involves fluids going through tubes, which go into our body. The fluids tend to be warm, by the way, and the warmer the fluid, the more it extracts the chemical from the matrix and puts it into the fluid. Okay?
Is it the tubing or is it the bag or is it both? Like, think of an IV bag.
The tubing is longer. The bag is larger. I can't tell you which is accounting for more, but I think they're both contributing to that. Yeah.
Was there something that you had talked about before about the infants and the more tubes that they have in them?
Yeah.
The more phthalates.
So that was measured. That was measured in Mount Sinai, where I work. And what they did was they looked at the number of tubes that went into the body of the infant in the intensive care nursery, the NICU, right?
Yeah.
And that more tubes that went into the body, the more phthalates came out in the urine. But it's not, in a much more mundane setting, there's a study that looked at how a cow was milked. This was an Eastern European study. They milked a cow by hand, so no tubes. They milked the same cow with presumably another day, a milking machine that had a lot of tubing in it. And then they looked at phthalates in the two milks. And the hand-milked milk was not containing phthalates, and the tube milk had lots of phthalates. So it's not rocket science, actually. It just, the warm fluid draws the phthalates out of the matrix into the fluid. That's all.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So, and this is maybe a little off, but is styrofoam and plastic, are they similar in a way? I'm thinking of like cup of noodles or anything that you heat up. It's probably going to have some similar compounds,
yes.
right? That you just wouldn't want to.
Yes, I don't want to do that. I want to put my cup of noodles, take it out of the container, and I want to put it in a ceramic bowl.
First of all, don't anybody eat cup of noodles, okay? No, I was kidding. Let's just not even eat a cup of noodles, okay? Let's not even. But if you are going to, at least put it in something ceramic or glass.
And by the way, just let's touch briefly upon the class of chemicals called PFAS. So we haven't talked at all about PFAS chemicals, but these are the barrier chemicals, and they're what's lining your Teflon pan, and also the scraper that you use on that Teflon pan. And also they keep out, they separate they protect the oil. And you can see that in a pizza box. You don't want the oil to go through the box, so you line that box with PFAS. In your waterproof jacket, you don't want the water to come through, so you line that jacket with PFAS. So anything that's going to be a barrier, just whenever you see barrier, try to find out what it's made of. And if it contains a PFAS chemical, you probably want to avoid it, just like that Teflon pan. Trade that Teflon pan in for an iron pan and you'd be good to go.
Okay. Those are some great suggestions. So we want to go more cast iron. That's what I cook in typically, or glass. Do you think avoiding drinking out of a plastic water bottle will probably be preferential?
Absolutely.
If you can use a reusable water bottle. Anything else?
Steel, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anywhere else you think that people are getting exposures to a lot of these, whether it be phthalates or anything that I guess it's impacting their endocrine system, that people might not be aware of, that might be an easy switch or an easy, I don't actually really need that. I'm thinking of like car fresheners, I don't use those anymore.
I was just going to mention that. So anything with a scent, smell, is going to have phthalates and other chemicals in it. That could be your wall freshener, or it could be your laundry soap, or it could be your laundry detergent, or it could be those dryer sheets you put in there. If it smells, you're going to, you don't want it. There's an app you can look at if you get Clearya. It's called Clearya, and it scans the barcode on the product in the supermarket. I've done that with people, walked through the supermarket with them, and we've been scanning codes, and the product will get a rating. And the rating will be poor if it has a smell, and it'll tell you the reason the rating is poor is from the fragrance. So try to avoid anything fragrance to the extent that you can.
All right. This is such valuable information. I'm so grateful that you shared it with me. I would be remiss to let you go before I ask about the article you sent me right before we started this. And if I'm going to look at my phone for a second here, Fighting for Survival, that was the title of this. Is there anything in that you wanted to bring up? Because it seemed like it was something that was newer and possibly some good stuff to talk about in that.
Yes, and then I have one more thing I want to talk about.
Absolutely.
So what you're talking about is an editorial that I and two colleagues wrote for The Hill to try to influence people on The Hill and policy. And it has to do with the fact that there's this huge discussion now about the use of IVF and the health, it ties into the abortion question and the question of the status of embryos. But what we talk about in that editorial is that if we don't take care with the exposures we're getting and the exposures that pregnant people are getting, that we may not have the embryos left to fight about. And that's our final line on that editorial. And I recommend it to anybody who wants sort of state-of-the-art discussion of that issue. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I haven't, is that if people want specifics, they should go to the book that I wrote with Stacy Colino. It was published in 21. It's called Countdown. Wait, let me just get it and I'll show it to you. I should have put it over here, but
no, that'd be great. I would love to see the book. I'm going to read the book, that's for sure. Do you happen to have it on Audible as well, or is it?
It is on Audible. It is on Kindle.
Wonderful.
You can put it on Kindle. You can get soft and hard.
I am a listen on the move kind of person. So, okay, Countdown. We've got
How
it.
do I?
There you go. Yeah, right there. There we go. That's good.
Countdown.
Okay.
It's on In Focus, but anyway, there it is. And we have 2 chapters on what you can do. So there's a lot of specifics there and a lot of recommendations for websites you can go to and groups who you can turn to. Lots of people are working in this space and doing a lot of fantastic work and trying to keep us healthy. And we just need people to listen to it and, pass it on. Pass it on to your family, your friends, your colleagues, and let's all do this together.
Absolutely. It's so good. And I almost want to end right there, but I have just one other question looping back, and I wanted to ask you this earlier. Does the quality of sperm impact miscarriage rates? And if you know anything about that, because I know a lot of times women walk around thinking that the fact that they can't, how do you say that? Women oftentimes walk around with guilt, feeling like if they have a miscarriage, it's their fault. And not that I'm looking to put fault on anybody, but I do want the information to be out there that if it is true that as you mentioned, the chromosomal health of the sperm, if it is impacted in any way negatively, could that have an impact on, even if it was a good, healthy egg, but it was met with a sperm that just wasn't quite healthy, could that lead to a self-termination of the pregnancy?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good and important point. If you look at infertility in couples or repeated miscarriage in couples, I don't want to say blame, the reasons distribute pretty equally, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 between a male explanation, a female explanation, and unknown or both. So sometimes it can be an incompatibility. That would be, just the two coming together. That'd be unusual. It could be something on the male side. having to do with, who knows, chemicals, other things that have affected his sperm quality. On the female side, effects on her egg quality or possibly a prior infection and so on. And it's all over the map. And it's true that traditionally women have been blamed for causing the miscarriage. And back to Henry VIII, who had, I think, 3 wives put to death because they couldn't give him a son, when it probably was he who couldn't have a son.
Oh, God. Thank goodness we've come a long way from there, but I think we have a long way to go. Shanna, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your research and your voice. And I'm so glad to share this with my listeners, because I think there will be a lot of very surprised individuals who are going to be able to make healthier, more informed decisions for not only themselves, but their loved ones as well. And that is always my goal. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Misha, for having me. And I'm really thrilled to talk to you and your audience. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much to Lila Quantum Tech for making this episode possible. Check them out at lilaq.com. And remember, use code MIESHA, that's MIESHA, for 10% off at checkout.
The Built for Growth podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Our content may include sponsorship and affiliate links through which we earn a small commission on sales made through those links.